Well, good morning, friends. It is so good to be able to be with you. I'm so honored that you'd invite a guy like me to come out and hang out with a bunch of people like you. So thank you for doing that. Wanted to just let you know something is that when I got out of seminary, the first church I went on staff with for the first 7 years was called Northwest Bible Church. I left Northwest Bible Church after 7 years and planted a church from Northwest Bible Church, and the new church was called North Community Church. I came to Phoenix in 1996 and pastored a church called North Ridge Community Church. And guess what? Here I am today at North Chapel Bible Church. So if you pick up a theme there, I'm into these North churches, and thank you for making me feel right at home here. I really look forward to getting the opportunity to visit with you today about a great topic. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, Bobby shared a little bit earlier, is that I've been married to my wife Mary for, it'll be 45 years in August. We have 3 adult kids that all live in the valley here. 2 out of 3 are married. We're working on number 3 there. And 2 years ago, I got to join the Grandpa Club, and I tell you, it's pretty cool. I've got a grandson who's 2, and then a little granddaughter was born 3 weeks ago today, and we are just absolutely loving this season of life. And as Bobby shared too, is I've been through this merger journey that you are on, and I'm here to tell you there is life after mergers. Isn't that great? And so 2 years ago, in 2019, Northridge Community Church, after 25 years for the church, 23 of which I was there, we merged with Scottsdale Bible Church, and have really been enjoying this new season. And big changes, I get that, but some really, really great opportunities to ministry and impact. I know you're going to love that as well in the days ahead. And today I'm going to have the opportunity to talk to you. Over the last week, everybody was focusing all around the world on the Passion of the Christ. That's what you do from Good Friday and Easter and Palm Sunday. It's called Passion Week. And so they talk about the Passion of the Christ. And today what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about the compassion of the Christ. And we're going to talk about a great story that appears in Luke chapter 18. If you have a Bible, I'm going to have you open up to the book of Luke chapter 18, verse 35. If not, we'll have the verses behind me, or you can pull it up on your phone. But we're going to talk about a really famous story that contrasts a bunch of people that didn't have much compassion with Jesus, a person who did have a lot of compassion. So we're going to look at that story in just a few minutes. But when I think about the topic of compassion, I'm reminded of a story I heard some time ago about these 4 golfers. They were good friends, and they were going to go out golfing one Saturday morning. They did it every Saturday morning, and so they went to their little local club there. And of these 4 friends, one was a musician, one was a physician, one was a teacher, and one was a preacher. And so they're out there golfing, having a nice time, and all of a sudden, they're on the 3rd hole, and one of the friends speaks up and says, "Guys, I just realized something. We've been golfing for 3 hours, and we're only on the 3rd hole. You know, at this rate, I mean, you do the math on that one, it's going to take us 18 hours to finish this round of golf. It's going to be pitch black by the time we hit the back 9, is what's going on?" And the second friend spoke up and said, "Well, I think I figured out the problem. I don't think it's us. I think it's the people in front of us, the foursome up there. They're taking forever, and we can't play any faster than they do." And so the third friend spoke up and says, "Listen, I know what I'll do. I'll call the ranger over." And I'm not a big golfer, so I didn't even know what a ranger was, but a ranger's kind of like the Barney Fife of the golf course. Remember that, Barney Fife, the little policeman? And so they called the ranger over, and they said, "Hey, listen, these guys in front of us, they're killing us. It's going to take us all day to even play the front 9. You need to get those people off the course." And the ranger looks at these 4 friends and he says, "Listen, guys, I know this isn't easy for you, but I really can't do anything about the foursome in front of you, because let me tell you a little bit about their story. Those guys up there, they're 4 firemen, and about a year ago, we had a huge fire in our clubhouse. And what had happened was, by the way, did I turn this on yet? Nope. Wait a minute. Oh, good. Okay, I'm back on again. Sorry about that. So I had a huge, back to my story. Okay, big fire in the clubhouse, and these 4 firemen came out, and these heroes, you know what they did? They ran inside of the clubhouse. They saved a bunch of people. They saved a bunch of property, and it was just incredibly heroic, but unfortunately, a huge accident took place, and all 4 of them ended up losing their sight in this fire. And it was a terrible tragedy. And so here's what we did, is we said, because we are so grateful for what you did and your sacrifice, you can play golf at our golf club anytime you want, no cost. And so that's the story. Therefore, we can't throw them off the golf course. Well, the four friends kind of looked at each other, and you ever been in one of those situations where you've been bashing something and you found out the whole story, and so they kind of think, oh, I feel terrible. I can't believe we were being impatient and judgmental. And so finally the musician speaks up, and the musician says, you know what I'm going to do? I feel terrible. I'm going to get a bunch of my musician friends together, and we're going to have a benefit concert, and we're going to raise money and donate it to the firemen and their family. And then the physician speaks up and says, I feel terrible too. You know what I'm going to do? I went to med school with a top eye surgeon in the state of Arizona. I'm going to call him up and see if there's something he can do for them. And then the teacher speaks up, and the teacher says, you know, at my school there's a special ed teacher, and her husband trains seeing eye dogs, and I'm going to see if maybe she could donate some service dogs to these guys. And so they're all kind of coming up with these ideas, and finally they realize that everybody's talking, everybody's showing compassion, except the pastor, golfer friend of theirs, isn't saying anything. And so they look at Pastor Pete and they say, Pastor Pete, you haven't said anything. What are you thinking? And Pastor Pete thinks for a while, and finally he says, you know what I was thinking? I was thinking that they should be playing golf at nighttime. Well, the reason I like that little story is it tells me that, hey, when it comes to compassion, some people are better at it than others, aren't they? And we think, boy, pastors, now those guys must be the black belts with compassion. Well, not necessarily. And some are good at it, some are not so good at it as well. But one of the things that we can safely say is that unfortunately, even though not everybody's good at it, compassion is sometimes a hard thing. But I want to tell you something. It's a hard thing that seems to be getting harder and more rare. In fact, a fascinating study was done a while back by a guy by the name of Jamal Zaki at Stanford University. And what he did is 30 years ago, he went and he asked college students, thousands of college students, to self-report on a questionnaire they had to determine how compassionate they were. He did that 30 years ago. And then what happened is recently he came back and he gave the same test, not to the same college students, but kids who are college students now. And what he wanted to find out, are we becoming more compassionate or less compassionate as time goes on in this country? And here's what he found. He found out that self-reported compassion had dropped by 48% in just 30 years. And this was before COVID. This happened, I think, in 2018 when this study was taken. And so we are in a season, we are in a culture where compassion is hard, and it's getting harder to find. But what we're going to see this morning when we look at our passage in Luke chapter 18, we're going to see that Jesus had something to say. Jesus says, listen, I know it's hard, I know it's hard to find, but Jesus says, if you're going to follow me, I want you to not just show compassion, I want you to grow compassion. And so we're going to answer the question this morning, how do we do that? How can we become more compassionate men, more compassionate women? How can we become more like Christ and less like the crowd? And in the interest of time, I'm not going to read all 8 verses there. I'm going to read them as we go along with the 4 points, but let me just, first of all, just kind of give you an overview of what's happening. Jesus is on his final approach into Jerusalem, where the events that we talked about last week are going to take place. But the last big stop he makes before going to Jerusalem to be crucified and for all that goes on with the Easter story, the last big stop is in Jericho. Now, this particular account takes place in Jericho. Jesus is going to end up healing a blind man, or we're going to say some blind men. But it's kind of a complicated passage for a couple of reasons. In fact, this passage appears in three different Gospels. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all have the story of Jesus healing the blind man. But it's kind of an interesting thing. Let me show you what happens here. The Luke passage, what we're going to look at today, says that this story occurs while Jesus is entering Jericho. And Jesus meets one blind man. That's the story that we're going to look at today. But Matthew 20, verse 29, that account says this event happened while Jesus is leaving Jericho. And it happened, well, there were 2 blind men there. And then you go, okay, well, let's go to the tiebreaker. What does Mark have to say? Well, Mark says this. It happened while Jesus is leaving Jericho, but instead of 2 blind men, there's 1 blind man mentioned, and his name is Bartimaeus. And so what Bible critics have done, they've come along and they've said, well, this proves that the Bible is full of contradictions, and that you can't be both entering and leaving Jericho at the same time. You can't be healing 1 blind man, and then the next time you're healing 2 blind men. But guys, let me first of all just share with you a little bit about how those things reconcile. If you've ever had the opportunity to go to the Holy Land, and especially if you have the opportunity to go to Jericho, I've had the opportunity to do it twice. But when you go to Jericho, there is an area called Old Testament Jericho, which is a huge mound, and it's where one civilization was built upon another civilization. It's called Old Testament Jericho. New Testament Jericho didn't get built on top of Old Testament Jericho. It got built down the street, literally 1 mile away. And so when this event happens, when Jesus shows up in Jericho, on the one hand, he is going by Old Testament Jericho. So he is leaving Jericho, but he's also entering Jericho at the same time. If he's in that 1 mile stretch between those two, which is where the road runs, those two become reconciled. And the second thing is that the idea that some passages talk about Jesus healing one blind man, the other passage talks about Jesus healing two blind men. Clearly, it's apparent that there were two blind men there, but only one is identified by name. And apparently, most of the conversation takes place with the one. So it's not really a contradiction. It doesn't say one and only one blind man. It says Jesus talked to the blind guy. And so what we're going to do, we're going to look at that story of Jesus healing the blind men, although this passage talks about the individual. He's between Old and New Testament Jericho. But what we're going to see is Jesus is going to show us what does real Jesus-like compassion look like. And so I've got for your outline today, if you want to take a few notes or whatever, I've got a little bit of an acronym here for you. It spells the word mail, M-A-I-L, like the mail you send, but 4 different characteristics of highly compassionate people. Here's the first thing I want you to consider. Number 1 is this, that compassionate people are, first of all, the M is they are motivated by mercy. They're motivated by mercy. Now, different people are motivated by different things when it comes to engaging with others. You know, if you're going to engage with someone and have a conversation or have a relationship, you don't tend to have a conversation or relationship with just everybody. There are certain things that motivate you to have a conversation or that relationship. And I wrote a couple things down here that are typical. One is that many people are motivated to engage personally with others by merit. By merit. And what merit basically means is there's something about this person that makes them lovely or lovable, or they've earned my engagement with them. And so I'm going to love lovely people. I'm going to love unlovely people. I remember years ago watching an episode of the ABC show, which is called What Would You Do? Did you ever see What Would You Do? And it's kind of like Candid Camera, but it's a hidden camera. But they want to see how would people act during certain ethical or moral situations. And it can be kind of embarrassing or whatever. But this particular episode, what John Quinones did is he had a car that was pretended to be broke down by the side of the road. He had its hood up and the trunk was up and the emergency lights flashing. And next to that particular car, he had a very attractive, strikingly beautiful woman stand. And then in another part of town, he had a car with a hood up, the trunk up, the emergency lights flashing, and he had a not so attractive woman standing by that. And they had hidden cameras on both. And he wanted to see, are people going to stop and help both people equally? And you can guess the result is about 4 to 1, about 4 times as many people stopped to help the attractive woman as stopped to help the woman who wasn't as attractive. And we hear this, and part of us say, well, that's not right. Well, of course it's not right, but it's real, isn't it? That's what a lot of real humans do in our culture, is they love the lovely, and they don't so much love the not so lovely as well. But friends, that's what a lot of people do, is a lot of people are motivated by merit. Other people are motivated by either manners or mandate. You kind of get that. Someone comes up to you and someone who's kind of an undesirable, maybe you're at the red light and someone's out there holding up a sign, wanting money from you or whatever, and your air conditioner's out. And by the way, 2 of my 3 cars in our family, our air conditioner's been out. We had them, and part of the reason I wanted to get them fixed is I hate leaving my windows down when I pull up to those lights, and people, walked up on that one. And but what happens is someone comes up and they hold up a sign that says God bless you, and they start talking to you, it is hard not to engage in them. Why? Because that's what good manners do, is we engage with people who engage with us. And so some people engage with others because of merit, some because of manners. But Jesus engages because of a third thing, and it's very rare. Jesus decides to engage, and he's motivated by merit. What that means is Jesus says, I'm going to love not just the lovely and the lovable, I'm going to love the unlovely and the unlovable. And so this is where our story starts. Verse 35, Luke 18:35 says, as Jesus approached Jericho, a blind man was sitting by the roadside, and he was begging. When he heard the crowd going by, he asked what was happening, and they told him, Jesus of Nazareth is passing by, and he called out, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. Mercy is a big deal here. Now, one of the things that we know, one detail about this man, it doesn't say that he looked awful, that he was unlovely, that he was unlovable, but the text does add this statement. It says that he was a blind beggar. And if you and I were to meet a person who is visually impaired, if we ran into Stevie Wonder, or if we ran into Ray Charles, or somebody like that on the street, most of us would think, hey, this person has a visual disability, and we need to make special accommodation for this person. And that's kind of our culture. But the culture at the time of Jesus wasn't like that. The culture at the time of Jesus, if you met a blind person, you would immediately think that this is an undesirable person, this is an unlovely person, this is an unlovable person. And the reason you would think that is that blindness was associated with God's disfavor and was associated with a dishonorable person. In fact, in Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 8, it talks a little bit about that. It says this, it says, the Lord will afflict you, talking about a specific group of people, the Lord will afflict you with madness, blindness, and confusion of mind. And what happened is a lot of people that day would say, hey, well, listen, if a blind person can't get as close to the temple as a regular person can, and if we can't offer blind sheep for sacrifices, and if the Old Testament verse talks about blindness, at least in some cases, is a curse, we just must assume that everybody who's blind is a person who is an undesirable, is a person who's unlovable, is a person who is unlovely. And so that's how other people are seeing this guy. But how does this guy end up seeing himself? Well, the answer to that is found in that last phrase where when he crawls out to Jesus, he says, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And what Jesus is doing is he is asking for mercy. Now, mercy is a Greek word called eliao, and it literally means the relief of is providing relief or resources that someone doesn't deserve. And so the fact that he's crying out for mercy, he's not saying, Jesus, you got to do this for money, or you got to do this because I'm lovely or I'm lovable. He's basically saying, listen, I don't deserve this. I'm not lovely. I'm not lovable. I'm not necessarily a bigwig in society, but do this out of mercy. And what is Jesus motivated by? He's motivated out of mercy. Well, what do we need to know a little bit about this word mercy? Well, the Bible tells us four things that I'll go through kind of quickly. And the first thing under this first point about what does the Bible let us know about mercy is this, that God has it. Okay? Jesus is a black belt when it comes to mercy. He is the master of mercy. In fact, in the Old Testament, 2 Samuel 24:14, David says this, I am in deep distress. Let us fall into the hands of the Lord, for his mercy is great. So first thing about mercy is God has it big time. Second thing about mercy, just general observation in this first point, is this, that while God has it, we need it. We need it big time. Titus 3:4 says this, but when the kindness and love of God our Savior reappeared, he saved us not because of righteous things we had done, but because of his mercy, he saved it. And so God has it, we need it. Third general observation about mercy is this, that mercy is a unique gift for some, but it's a requirement and a responsibility for all. In Romans chapter 12, there's one of 3 or 4 laundry lists in the New Testament that give what are the spiritual gifts, that every one of us here has one or more spiritual gifts who's trusted Christ. The Holy Spirit comes and gives you some kind of special endowment. And some of you are really good teachers. Some are really good encouragers. Some are good when it comes to serving. Is you all have a unique spiritual gifts. But in verse 8 of Romans 12, one of the spiritual gifts that's listed is mercy. And there are certain people in this room and certain people in our life who have a unique spiritual endowment to provide mercy in ways that the rest of us can't. And so you know what the tendency is? The tendency is if someone makes you aware of a terrible problem, of someone who's going through a horrible time, the tendency for me is to say, you know what, I don't have the gift of mercy, but my wife Mary, she's really good at it. So let's call in Mary as well as those F4s, kind of like that one is let's give it to the person who's gifted in that area. But the Bible says mercy isn't just a gift for some, but the Bible says mercy is a responsibility and a requirement for all. In fact, in Hosea 6:6, it says this, for I desire mercy, not sacrifice, and acknowledgement of God rather than burnt offerings. And so it's a unique gift, but also a requirement for all. And the last just general observation about mercy and that we should be motivated by mercy is this, is that when mercy is shared, it brings great blessing. In one of the Beatitudes in Matthew 5:7, Jesus says this, blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. And so first thing, you want to be a highly compassionate person. First thing it means is this, is that you got to be motivated by mercy, not merit, not manners, not mandate, not money, but mercy. Here's the second thing, though. The A part is this, is that high compassion people are, number 2, accessible when most others choose not to be. You can tell a highly compassionate person because they make themselves accessible when a lot of other people don't. Look at verse 39. It says, those who led the way rebuked him, and they told the blind man to be quiet, but he shouted all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. And so the picture we have here is that Jesus and the crowd, so Christ and the crowd, they're on the same road. And they're not only on the same road, the Jericho-Jerusalem road, but they're going in the same direction. They're going towards Jerusalem, towards the Passover. They're all following Jesus. So Christ and the crowd, same road, same direction physically. But all of a sudden, as the conversation unfolds, we realize that while they're going the same way physically, they're not going the same way spiritually, and they're not going the same way relationally. Because what the crowd does is the crowd sees this blind man crying out, and here's what they tell him. They tell him to step back and to shut up. Right? Pretty blunt, but that's what they tell him. Step back, shut up. Here's what Jesus does. Jesus says, step up and speak up. Very, very different. So some people are making themselves accessible. Some people, namely Jesus, are making himself accessible, but the crowd is making themselves unaccessible. And they think Jesus should be unaccessible. So here's the question. What are some things that compromise compassion? What are some things that make us less accessible to the people who need it the most? You ever thought about that? Well, I have just 3 things I want you to write down kind of under this. Things that that compromise our compassion. The first one is maybe the biggest one. And that is a full schedule, okay? As you get busier, guess what's going to happen? As your busyness goes up, I can just about guarantee your compassion is going to go down. And a great story on that appears in Malcolm Gladwell's great book he wrote probably 10, 15 years ago, but the book called The Tipping Point. In it, Gladwell records a story that took place at Princeton Seminary that used to be associated with Princeton University, but it's in Princeton, New Jersey. And what they did many years ago, I think this was the 1970s, is they did an experiment where they had 80 seminary students, and they brought them in one at a time, and they says, guys, here's this experiment we're doing, is we're going to ask you to leave this room in building A and to go down the alley right next to this building and go to building B, right across the courtyard. And when you go into building B, we want you to go into the 3rd room on your right, and inside will be a group of people. And here's what we want you to do. We want you to go into that room, and when you see those people, I want you to give a spontaneous talk, 5-minute talk on the story of the Good Samaritan. Okay, so they all got the same assignment. But here's the difference, is half of those 80 seminary students, they said, okay, look, I just looked at my watch and we are clearly running behind. They're probably already there. They're already waiting. So if you could, please hurry up and get over there. So for half of them. The other half, they said, listen, we still got a few minutes, so you don't have to run, but you might as well go over and wait over there until they're ready for you. And so that was the difference between one group of 40 and the other group of 40, and they sent them out one at a time to do that. Well, what the students didn't know was that in the alley between building A and building B, that the researchers had hired an actor to portray themselves as being a homeless person who was having a physical emergency. He was laying on the ground there. He was looking almost, unconscious, and he was laying there moaning and groaning. And so that was the little experiment that they were doing. They wanted to see this. They wanted to see, since seminary students are on their way to talk about the story of the Good Samaritan, where after all, you're going to be talking about, helping somebody who's an alien on the side of the road, would they stop and help this guy? Here's what they found. Those who they said, hurry up and get over there, you're running late, only 10% stopped. Of the ones they said, listen, it's no big hurry, but you probably need to get over there right now, 63% stopped. And what does it say? It says this. It says that, man, if we let our schedule get really packed and we're always in a hurry, you know what? We're going to be less compassionate than those who build margin into their life. So busy schedules will make us less compassionate. A second thing is big egos will make you less compassionate. What a big ego does is, it occurs when we think we are too good for those who are too bad. It was many years ago, but my best friend in Dallas at the time, who's in heaven now, but was kind of a guy's guy. His name was John, and John was on the 1973 Notre Dame National Championship football team. If you ever saw the movie Rudy, John was on that team, and so he's kind of a guy's guy. He eventually went on to law school, did very well, became a partner in a huge law firm, really talented guy. But John, when he was in college, started drinking. He started drinking heavily, and he became an alcoholic. And about 5 years before I met John, he got sober through AA, and then he eventually, about 3 years after that, accepted Jesus as Savior, and we became close friends. And so John invited me to go with him for his 5-year sobriety celebration at first time I'd ever been to an AA meeting. And I went with John there, and he got his 5-year chip. And riding in the car after the AA meeting, riding home with John, I was telling him about, hey, these are the things that I really loved about an AA meeting. I've never been to one before. And one of the things I said was this, is John, in your AA meeting, there was about 40 people there. And some of them were CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. But some of them were prostitutes. And I said, you don't see that happen very often, like in a church. And here's what John said. He said, you know what, Mike, I found sometimes I can learn more from the prostitute than I can from the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. And so what you got here is you had a very special guy who went on to have a huge impact in the lives of people, my friend John. Why? Because he was a big guy, but he didn't have a big ego. And when you've got a little ego, you know what can happen is you can do some serious damage against the adversary known as Satan. And you can do some huge good for building the kingdom of God through compassion when you have a small ego. Last thing I want to throw out real quickly in terms of that kind of disrupts compassion, and that's this, is that excessive fear will do it. Excessive fear. Bobby and I talked a little bit about that at halftime between first and second service, but for years, my wife, Mary, would help lead teams to Guadalajara, Mexico to work in an orphanage down there in a very rough area. And my wife, Mary, I'm 6'5", about 220 pounds. And so I'm a little bigger than my wife. My wife's, Mary's about 5'2", about 105 pounds. And so you never want to sit behind me in church on Sunday morning because you can't see over the big chubby guy in front of you or whatever like that. But Mary's just this little Texas fireball. And when we go to Guadalajara and when she would lead trips down there, she was usually the smallest adult there. And sometimes she would go and there'd be these big, strong guys, some were ex-college athletes and stuff, and they would go. And Mary would see a need at one of these little shanty towns where they would go into, one's called Cardboard City. And what Mary would do is if someone would invite her in, she would go in, she would hold hands, she'd pray with them, she'd do all that kind of stuff. And what she began to notice is a lot of these people that were along in the trip, they wouldn't go in. And when Mary would talk to them, she would get discussions back from these big, strong guys. A lot of them would say, well, I was afraid to go in. Why? Because what if they have lice? Guess what? They do have lice. Well, what if there's roaches? There's not roaches. There's big roaches in some of those places. But guys, you know what does? Excessive fear keeps us from rendering compassion because compassion is messy ministry. And so how do we show compassion like Jesus did? Well, it starts out with the M part, which is that compassionate people are motivated by mercy. Secondly, is they are accessible when other people choose not to be. Here's the third thing that they do. Number 3 is this. Compassionate people are intentional about the relief of grief. They're intentional about the relief of grief. You know, there are 3 different dimensions to compassion. And they're kind of obvious. A lot of times when people think about, Joe is so compassionate, they think that he is emotionally compassionate. And Jesus was emotionally compassionate. When he went to Lazarus' funeral, John 11:35 says, Jesus wept. That's important, to feel what other people are feeling. That is compassionate, but it's only one dimension. Another dimension of compassion is the verbal dimension, which means I don't just see something that someone's suffering with, but I say something to them. And you'd be surprised at how many people, when they see a neighbor in need, say, oh, I don't want to say anything. I don't know what I'd say. Or it'd be uncomfortable. Or I don't want to create is compassion. There's not just an emotional component. There's a verbal component. But the third and key one is this. There's also a behavioral component. And one of the things we see is every time the word compassion is mentioned in the Gospels in reference to Jesus, Jesus tends to do all 3 of these, but the one he always does is the third one. He does something. He doesn't just see something and say something. He ends up doing something. Well, in Matthew chapter 20, verse 34, one of the accounts we talked about of Jesus healing the blind man, it says, Jesus, moved with compassion, touched their eyes, and immediately they regained their sight, and they followed him. There was an emotional component to the compassion Jesus showed to the blind men we're talking about. But our verses here in this passage, verses 40 and 42 of Luke 18 says this. Jesus stopped and ordered the man to be brought to him. Okay, what that is that's a behavioral response. When he came near, Jesus asked him, what do you want me to do for you? Lord, I want to see, he replied. Jesus said to him, receive your sight. Your faith has healed you. There's the verbal and the behavioral components as well. And what Jesus is basically showing us is this, that if we're going to have true biblical Christ-like compassion, we're going to have to do more than just feel bad for people. That's important. It's going to have to go from something feeling for people, seeing them, saying something, but then doing something for them as well. We can't just meet people. We've got to treat people if we can. Well, how did he and how can we go from meeting to treating imperfect people who are suffering? Just two quick things. Number one is this, is Jesus assessed the need by asking good questions. Did you notice that? That's no small line. Is Jesus sees the blind man, and this is Jesus. He obviously the guy was blind, but Jesus says this, what do you want me to do for you? Okay? Because that is so important, because sometimes we end up meeting a need that we think someone has, when in reality they have a different need. And sometimes it's something as simple as to say, man, I hate hearing you're going through this. What can I do for you? Can I bring you a meal? And instead of bringing, your aunt's Jell-O salad with anchovies or whatever in that kind of thing, over as I love it, so you must love it. I'm going to meet your need. Is ask them, hey, what can I do for you? And if they don't have something, play multiple choice. Say, let me throw out three things, see if one of these would be helpful to you. And so Jesus assessed the need by asking good questions, and then he addressed the need by doing what he could to bring about relief. Now, if you're Jesus, you have more options that you can give people than if you're not Jesus, right? And so what Jesus does is he ends up giving this guy sight. And the reality, I've been a pastor a long time. I've prayed for a lot of sick people. I'm convinced that God can use us and that he can heal people. But I have to be honest with you, I've never once prayed for a blind person and then suddenly a minute later they were able to see. I wish I could, but I haven't done that. But you know what happens? That doesn't mean that I still can't assess and address their need and provide some relief in another way. And it means that you and I, we might not be able to give someone sight, but maybe we can give them insight. And maybe we can give them the gift of our heart and our compassion and our sympathy and our presence when they're going through a tough time. Or maybe we can help them generate possible solutions or take something else off their plate that they're struggling with to hold as well. And so it's important that we not just assess, but we address the need, because that's what compassionate people do, is they're intentional about the relief of grief in others. James 2:15 says this, suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to him, go, I wish you well, keep warm and well fed, but does nothing about his physical needs, what good is it? And so we've looked at the M, the A, the I, and here's the last characteristic of a highly compassionate person. Number 4 is this. Highly compassionate people are, number 4, they're likely to grow gratitude and grace. When you show mercy to someone, when you show compassion to someone, you know what's likely to grow is gratitude and grace. I have always been fascinated by what happens when a tiny touch in our life can bring about great growth. Aren't you? That little act produced something really fantastic. And I was thinking about that I read an article years ago about a guy by the name of Dr. James Bierkit, who lives here in Arizona, and for years he has studied population trends in Arizona. And I haven't lived here forever, but I've been here about almost 25 years now, and I always thought, well, the greatest growth for the population of Arizona must have been when I came here. Right? You ever feel a little bit like that? I came here in about 95, and the city was booming. I mean, we live out north up by Cave Creek, and the 101 wasn't there. The Tatum kind of stopped up. It was just kind of a really small. And I thought, oh, clearly this is the biggest growth period, but it wasn't. Do you know the biggest growth period in the state of Arizona was? It was from 1950 to 1960. Arizona grew by 300% in that 10-year period. Anybody here lived here between 1950 and 1960? We had a few of our natives are here. I won't put you on the spot, but if I were just to ask all of you about what do you think the one little act was? What is the one thing, the small thing, the tiny tweak that produced all that growth? You know what it was? It was the addition of air conditioning. Yeah, affordable air conditioning was invented between 1950 and 1960. That one little tiny tweak ended up producing great growth. And guys, in the story that we looked at today, the story of Jesus healing, it's just one blind man. It's not feeding 5,000, it's just one. It's not carried on CNN or Fox News. It's just a tiny little act. But you know what this tiny act does? It ends up producing great growth in the area of gratitude and in the area of grace. I want you to listen to what Luke 18:43, the last verse in this passage says. It says, immediately he received his sight, and here's what happened. He followed Jesus, praising God. His gratitude grew. But then it adds this, when all the people, remember Jesus is part of this big crowd of non-compassionate people, but it says when all the people saw it, they also praised God. And so what it tells me is this, is that when compassion is conveyed, is the one who's been touched ends up growing in gratitude and grace. The one who's doing the touching grows in gratitude and grace. But here's the exciting things. The people who witness compassion showed to other people is they grow in grace and gratitude as well. And in closing, I want to share with you one story about that. We've saw today that compassionate people are motivated by mercy. They're accessible when most others choose not to be. They're intentional about the relief of grief, but they're likely to grow gratitude and enlist gratitude and grace in other people. We kind of saw that today, but I want to give you an illustration of how gratitude grows when you show compassion. It's a story that happened to me back when I was about a year out of seminary. About a year out of seminary, I went on staff at Northwest Bible Church in Dallas, and then a year later, I started working on a PhD program in marriage and family therapy part-time in a big state university up in Denton, Texas. And Denton, Texas, big university, that's where Dr. Phil went, so that's kind of the claim to fame up there on that one. And so I'm in this class. It's probably maybe the first or second year that I'm in this doctoral program. And again, big state school, big secular environment, psychology department. And I'm sitting in this class in the back row. And the guy sitting next to me is a guy that I came to know and became a friend of mine. His name's Carte. He was a therapist, sharp guy, not a follower of Jesus. But we became buddies. And we sat in the back row, and about the second day of class, we're sitting there, and all of a sudden, 5 minutes in the class, Carte taps me on the shoulder, and he says, "Do you smell something?" And I go, "Yeah, I do." And what is it? And he goes, "I don't know." And so that happened the second day. Third day of class, we're sitting in there, 5 minutes into class, all of a sudden, guess what? Carte says, "Do you smell that again?" I go, "Yeah, what? I don't know what it is." Third day of class, Carte says, "Do you think are we over like one of the laboratories? Are they cooking something? Or what? Carte, I have no idea, but it's awful, isn't it?" Yeah. So this goes on, and finally about fourth day of class, Carte looks at me and says, "You know what it is? I think it smells like creamed corn. I think it's creamed corn." And I go, "Yeah, I like creamed corn, but that smells terrible. I don't like that creamed corn." So we're convinced that someone, somewhere, somebody has creamed corn. Well, about halfway through the semester, we come to class, and all of a sudden, for the first time all semester, we don't smell creamed corn. And so we're kind of thinking, well, this is a miracle, I guess, right, on this one? And so, but what happens halfway through the class, a woman walks in the front door, a student who's probably about 40 years old. She sat in the front row. We didn't think anything about it. And 5 minutes later, guess what we smelled? Creamed corn. And I look over at Carte, and Carte does this. Creamed corn. Just kind of mouths it like that. And I go, "Yeah, what's going on?" And so we're kind of thinking, what kind of woman, smells like creamed corn and comes to class every day like that one? But the woman raises her hand. She ended up getting to class late, and she said, "I want to apologize for getting to class late." And she said, "I also want to say one other thing." She said, I haven't shared this in class before, but she said, "In the past year, I've been diagnosed with a rare and very aggressive form of cancer." And she said, "One of the things that the doctors are doing for me is they're having me use a topical cream that's supposed to activate the chemo and help it to work a little faster." And some of you may have heard, I hadn't heard this before, but it was called, she said, it's called DMSO. Yeah. And she says, and so as a result of it, is it creates, sometimes there can be a smell. And I look over at Carte, and I said, "You're terrible." I kind of wanted to blame him on that one. But you know what I'll never forget is this professor, a secular professor at a secular state school. This professor looked at that woman. He walked over to her. He probably couldn't get away with this now. He got down on one knee. He held both hands, and he reached over and he sniffed her. And after he sniffed her, he said, "You know what? I think you smell beautiful." And then he kissed her on the cheek. And I'll tell you something. Here, kind Pastor Mike is sitting in the back row complaining about the woman who smells like creamed corn. And this man showed a magnificent act of compassion, and it forever changed the way I looked at compassion for the next 35 years of my life. And so, guys, that's the power God has given each of us, is when we extend compassion to people, it grows us, it grows the person who's the recipient of compassion, but people are watching, and it grows the impact and the credibility of Christ and his church as well. And so that's our challenge this week. How can we go from just the passion of the Christ, as important as it is, to the compassion of the Christ as well? And I'm going to close this up in a word of prayer. And if you'd like afterwards to come up, Bobby's going to be here. And if you'd like him to pray for you, if you've got a physical issue or something else going on, he would love to be able to extend a little kindness and love and compassion to you as well. But let me close this up in a word of prayer. Father, thank you so much for the picture and the teaching and the principles of Jesus Christ. Lord, I thank you that Jesus came and that he died on the cross and rose again. That is amazing. It gives us such hope that literally with God all things are possible. Lord, I also thank you that your son Jesus wasn't just about the passion, he was about compassion. And it's our prayer that you would help us this week, even as we exit this room today, that we would become a more compassionate group of people that follow your son Jesus. I pray that we would assess and then address some type of relief of the people that we're going to meet this week. Help us, Father, to be motivated by a merciful love for the unlovely, the unlovable, and the least last and the lost. Father, help us to be accessible when other people choose not to be. And Lord, you promise then that if we'll just follow in the footsteps of Jesus, that grace can grow, that gratitude can grow, and it can happen in ourselves, in the person we touch, and in other people as well. And so, Father, I thank you for that and ask your blessing upon this great group of people as they continue to shine the light bright for Jesus, in whose name we pray. And all God's people said, Amen. Thank you, friends.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed today's message. Hope that was a blessing to you. And I want to let you know you can go to northchapel.net for even more spiritual resources that will help you on your journey as you follow Jesus. Hope to see you next time and hope you have a great day.